just things you know from experience, like variations on a theme. You know that an artist does variations on a theme, and that way that God chooses to like create a giraffe and a horse and a zebra and a, you know, that whole thing. And it's just there, that God is a creator and that he's a ruthless creator in the pursuit of his goals. And, you know, that's why The Walking Man by Rodin with both its arms ripped off and a gouge in the chest is better than John the Baptist, which is whole. And, you know, what's it like if you're the John the Baptist sculpture and he's ripping off your arms? But the better sculpture is the one without the arms. And how God is such a ruthless maker of what we are going to be. I mean, that may not be true, but I think it's a way of looking at how he uses all things to work for good for those that are called according to his purposes.
Yeah.
But that's just two of them, but I don't remember the rest of the list.
You know, just sit down and really think about that. I think that would be an interesting list.
It'd be fun if we got everybody together to submit to
I was like, is it wrong to do that?
the different disciplines, what we know that you don't. That would be fun.
So Karen, I'm not sure about ruthless, but he certainly is tactless as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I know ruthless is a harsh word, but I really do. I mean, I guess in the best possible, you have to do what you have to do to make it beautiful, to make it right. So I say ruthless. But it's not, but it's about love.
Yeah.
And beauty. And us being, you know, his workmanship. And he's the Alpha and the Omega, and he's the one who completes us the way he wants to. But that's also, I must admit, part of the reason I'm scared to death of him. I mean, I love him. I'm totally crazy about Jesus as a person. I love his personality. I've read about him. It's just this track record. Scary guy, scary people. I apologize. That's one of the things the pastor knows that I don't.
No, though. I mean, I know that whenever the idea of fear God comes up, that becomes a sticky situation in church. That's like, oh, we don't want to fear God. But I mean, that what you're talking about is awe, you know? And I wonder too, if there is a little bit of that as an art, just knowing how hard it is to create, then, you know, somebody who's able to create in that way is I don't know, awesome. I guess that's the right word.
Yeah, can you imagine like designing on a, you know, DNA level, like doing eyes with DNA cords, and it must be like music and science and art all at the same time. Like how?
Yeah.
Chains, DNA chains. My little science. I'm gonna.
You're muted. You muted yourself.
I'm gonna say one more, and that is how much you love what you make. Like, it's embarrassing how much while you're on a project, you love what you're doing, that thing, and that we're his project. And I know that no matter how screwy it is, he's fighting for us. He's so committed, because I know that from being an artist. I know that.
Yeah.
And maybe the word relentless is better than ruthless. And okay, I'll be.
So as we have this conversation, if you think of something that's maybe we could say, instead of things I know that you don't, it could be things we'd like to share with you, gifts we'd like to give, if we have any. If you have anything that you think, this is something I know that I bet pastors don't know, share that, because I'd like to know. Not as a pastor, but I just like to know.
Well, you know this stuff.
Okay, something happened this week, Lisa, that made me think of you. Can you all hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I have a Zoom class for children on Saturday morning, and now there's only 2 people in this class, and so I was thinking of you because I know sometimes you're concerned about convergence growth, but you know, if you're reaching the right people, it really doesn't matter how many people are there. So in this Zoom group on Saturday, there's a child that I knew from Jill's house. They're Unitarians and her grandfather's Iranian, and they're not Christians. And so at any rate, from the experience that I have with her, and I forwarded a note to Karen to read from her mother, I realized that she's supposed to be in a group with only a couple of people, and that the class is exactly the size it's supposed to be and reaching exactly the person it was meant. And it was an accident that she wound up in there. So it's like, size really does not matter at all. Audience really doesn't matter at all. If you're presenting to who God wants you to present to, that's all that matters, and you shouldn't worry about a thing.
Right.
I sometimes think I build a piece for one person, and maybe that person isn't alive yet.
Yeah.
Like maybe it has a date with somebody. And so
yeah,
that's how I comfort myself, that but I think it's legit.
I do too. I remember I know I've told you guys the story before, but in Covenant Players, we would, there were so many times I finally understood that it was happening, but at first it was very surprising that the performance would be like, meh. And then, we always had to talk to the audience, and there would always be someone who, I remember one time somebody saying, you did that play for me. This was for me today. This is exactly the conversation I've been having with God. And I do think and I think that's really helpful for artists to understand who your audience really is, because I think it is very tough to feel like it's work. There are lots of measurements about what is it worth to spend that amount of time, energy, money, whatever. Is it worth, how many people, how much money makes that worth it? And it's just, that's a wrong conversation completely. But putting it back into this conversation that Mako's having, and this idea of also whatever we're creating is somehow supernaturally connected to the new creation as well, that what you make in your bedroom that nobody ever sees is also just as beneficial. Like it's to me, it's like magic. It's like alchemy, it's something that's really cool.
I often compare it to alchemy, because I can take a bag of clay and turn it into something completely, much more valuable.
Yeah.
And so I do think art is alchemy. We take a piece of paper and a pencil, and Anita takes a couple of images, and we just turn them into something completely, something of value.
Yeah.
And more value than the sum of its parts.
Right.
Alchemy, the magic, the only alchemy in the world is art. I'll shut up.
Well, Kate really freed me with when she destroyed this magnificent work that Karen and I loved so much. After that, Kate, I have to tell you, I destroyed a whole bunch of work. It was very freeing.
Go. That's awesome. I mean, if it's part of what's meant to be, you know, it's part of, I don't know. For me, message, I guess, or the work, not even the message, just the act of this piece. So.
I have a real sensitivity to destroying art, and I'm so sorry, Kate, but I still feel really upset about it. But I will tell you, you know, like my stepmother, my wicked stepmother, all my paintings that I did in college, burned them, burned everything. So I think I'm really weird about like preserving stuff. Like I think I have some damage. I don't have any bitterness toward her anymore, but the idea that that a person would do that, you know, it's just, I remember yelling into the phone, "My babies!" I was like a kid. I was in my 20s with that giant ego, with, you know, and you know, it's so I'm sorry, Kate. I love that piece, but you know, we do have a photo of it, and that really works. You know, it's so powerful.
Karen, to take, I mean, for me, like, I mean, thinking about your situation, I mean, that's an assault on life that came out of you, you know, when someone took away your agency over your own creation and decided, you know, to do away with it. So I totally understand where, you know, that hesitancy, well, also one, the wounding that might have caused you, and then the hesitancy to destroy a work of art. I get that.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm so tedious with you. It's like I look at you and I remember that piece, like but never forget.
One, I'll give you a big comforting hug about it.
But I will say that the first decent piece I built in terracotta was a fallen angel, and I put it in the fireplace. And I told myself I was playing with patina, but I think I was just checking. I mean, a living fire. I mean, it was hot, you know, just to make sure that that it would make it if my stepmother got hold of it.
What was, I'm going backwards in the conversation that Mako had. What was the word that he used to describe it was kind of like, I'm going to say idol, that's going too far probably, but I think it is an idol. Our insistence on certainty, what was that? Our addiction to a certainty, or never mind then.
I don't remember. Elaborate a little bit more on what stuck out to you.
I didn't take notes. I was at the live thing, and then I watched it once, and I tried to review it today, but I had a hard time. Well, I'll come back to that. I'm going to see if I can find the transcript.
I don't know that certainty has any place in creativity. A lot of
I totally agree. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that he brought it up. I'm sorry.
That was a very classy statement, Anita. It gives you away that how good you are.
Somewhere in the book, and I don't remember where it is. Mako actually does talk about works of art that have been destroyed, and but I can't remember like what sort of the moral of the story was. I just remember it was somewhere in there, like that his friend, I mean, he had some works destroyed after September 11, I think, and then his friend, something happened, and I don't even know like what exactly was the work of art, but like a lot of it got destroyed, and how it was actually really freeing for his friend for that to happen. But I don't remember what the moral of the story. I just remember him talking about it.
I think Bruce Herman lost a big collection of his own work during a lightning strike that burned a house down that I think he built.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they talked some about that when they were here in DC at the Bible Museum, and how it's sort of like caused them to think through more of what they were doing and brought more of a Lenten type attitude into their work.
What's a Lenten type attitude in your work? I'm just curious.
Like making your work more challenging personally, I would think would be part of it. Bringing like sorrow into your work as well. Sometimes it can be seen as like a deeper level of maturity as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Kind of talking about ambiguity related to there was something that he had mentioned like in a Christianity Today article that is in his book, like Silence and Beauty, which is about it's more an exploration about like Japanese culture and sort of the philosophical ideas of beauty in Japanese culture. And what really struck me, sorry, sounds playing the piano, he's creating, is sort of being comfortable with ambiguity, because I think, or Christians being comfortable with ambiguity, because, you know, there's in Western culture, you know, you're either, even though they say, oh, it's an either, well, yeah, in Western culture is very much either or, in the sense like, you have Jesus in the heart or you don't, you know, it's very like either or. Whereas in Japanese culture, there's just more of an understanding that it's not just that there's something more nuanced. And I guess he was talking about Endo's book, which I haven't read, but Martin Scorsese did a movie on it about how two Spanish missionaries went to Japan a long time ago and tried to, evangelize. But what happened was the leaders in Japan at the time didn't like this, because they saw it as a way to sort of cause an uprising. And so they forced Christians to renounce their faith by, I think, like stepping on a figure of Jesus as a way to publicly renounce your faith. And so, but at the same time, and I haven't read the book, but it's like, can you, I guess the question Mako was trying to say was, by stepping on that picture of Jesus, does that really mean that you're not a Christian, or is there something else going on? At least that's kind of my interpretation of it. And it's sort of like being able to wrestle with that, because I think And I guess if you didn't step on the picture, you would, get tortured or killed or something like that. So, because I think at the end of the book, they kind of describe about how this one guy, like, he stepped on the picture, but then actually, you can kind of see, like, that there was sort of a faith line that followed him. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is just trying to be comfortable with sort of ambiguity. I don't know. 'Cause I think that's kind of bringing it to the broader cultural discussion. I think, I'm kind of right. I've tried to write some stories a while back ago about people in ambiguous situations, and it's like, and where is God? Is that, God isn't just in the black and white. He's in ambiguity too, and there, sometimes you're in situations where there's just a lot of gray, and where is God in that? So.
See, I think that's why it's so essential for the arts to be, or artists to be a part of the conversation of theology, because I don't know that, there are some of these things that are really difficult to articulate in a logical, argumentative way that makes sense when you're experiencing it. We just started reading the Narnia series, Lark and I, and she's a little bit young, but that's how old I was when I just couldn't wait. And we're reading The Magician's Nephew, which is, all about the creation story and God. And it's opening these doors that were so open for me as a child that I closed at one point because it was almost too painful, honestly, to just feel this separation from something. But just, it's not a book of theology, but the character of Aslan and the creation process and the poetic nature that C.S. Lewis talks about this with makes it so alive in a part of me, makes God so alive in a part of me. That's just, it's that magic, it's that alchemy again. Like I think being able to be comfortable with ambiguity, I think we have to learn it. We have to experience it. And there's just not a whole lot of, I think you have to be really artful in order to create that kind of space, to invite people into a use of their imagination that's bigger than, and it holds the stuff that you might reject as well as the stuff that you affirm in tension together, and like, this is a natural place to be. And that, I think that color is a big part of what's missing in our capacity to even talk about our faith in an effective way with other people. Is that I know for me, for a long time, it felt like when I go to talk about Jesus, I feel like I've got to use this script. I'm using these words, which I believe, but they don't convey what it really is, and I don't know. I think I'd be curious for you to keep writing your stories and share your stories, Joanna.
If I ever do, I don't know. I was very good about like doing like 10 minutes a day, like several years ago. Then I just stopped, and I just never.
Yeah.
And then like other things catch my eye. I just like do too many things and don't finish things. So, but it would be nice. So
Yeah.
Have you guys all been exposed to a book called Fantasies by, I think, George MacDonald, Phantassies? It's written by this man who completely like thrilled Tolkien and C.S. Lewis with his this book. And so I read it, like, it's not Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, it's dated now, but it is such a delightful, it's about a fairy tale. He creates a world, a fantasy world. He structures it. he makes it go, and it gives a permission, especially when you read the respect C.S. Lewis had for him. It gives so much permission to kind of go off in directions freely. And it's like the Christian imagination. I think that what hurts us the most is our imagination is not freed. Our imagination isn't given permission. It's like, if you're not careful, you think it's all propaganda. You think that you're a maker of propaganda. If you don't, to find out you can do how much we can do, all the places we can go. And it just reminded me again, because the fairy tale is so corny, but and it's even childish. And here we are with this guy with these fairies. And I thought about, and so it's just permission. It's good to read these things to give us permission of what we can do, because the Christian culture is always trying to kind of, unfortunately, it's not the culture at large, it is the Christian culture that's always kind of putting a cap on it. You know, you couldn't really, unless you really examined it, you would feel uncomfortable writing a historical fiction story involving Jesus Christ, where he's talking to Mary when he's 14. You know, you just, oh my gosh, you know, that's adding to the word, you know, or something like that. Like, and then what we have to do is we have to kind of research what we're allowed to do and find out what we're permitted, so we can be free. And sometimes we have to do the work, if we have a tender conscience, to actually make sure that's okay. And it's sad, but I think it's really important for our freedom.
Yeah, I think that's such an important conversation, and it's so fascinating to think about that. I mean, as a theater person, that's so much of it is getting in the stories that aren't told, like you're talking about Jesus talking to Mary when he was 12 years old. I've started getting visions of, like, what would it look like for Christian filmmakers who are Christians, who have stories to tell. You know, I've just, like, there's so much incredible, fantastic, like, crazy art stuff that you could do in any number of moments within the biblical story, like, to really imagine. And I'm not just talking about Revelation and the prophets, I mean any of it. But yeah, what would your audience, who is your audience? I mean, this is what stops people. Who is your audience then? Because it would either have to be acceptable enough or good enough, I guess, that it would have a commercial audience, you know, maybe not Christian enough, because it certainly wouldn't be accepted within the Christian world. You would be, the theologians would, and the pastors and the armchair theologians would, and it's not even theologians. I think it's because there's been so little room for imagination. There are a lot of watchdogs that have been trained to stop other people from exercising their imagination. There's fear. I think it's fear. It's fear that if we go off in that way, we're going to get into deep water. We're going to get into hot water. It's that ambiguity. There's not enough room for ambiguity. So I think the only way to change that is for a bunch of artists to raise up as an army and just do it anyway, you know?
We just have to know it's okay. I think, you know, I have a thing where the kid with the tender conscience growing up and not knowing what they can do. I just feel so bad about that, because I had, the thing about my wicked stepmother burning my paintings, I'm in a fundy church. People who know me know that I have that background. And fundamentalist church, like these people used to like wear little doilies on their head, right? But they were the tenderest, most loving people. And it was a little like house church when I was in Virginia Beach. And the beautiful, lovely woman with the doily on her head, when she found out I had nude paintings, said, well, you probably have to destroy those. And that's when I started hunting. And I started hunting in the Word, and he uses nudity. He talks about a girl with their skirts pulled up over her, self. I mean, he paints pictures with you can see them. And so then I knew I could do it. If he could do it, I can do it. But it's like we have to hunt it out for ourselves, and everybody has to reinvent the wheel. And I wish there was a way to just free people. That's my little shtick. But anyway, I'll get off that.
I think I think sharing those stories is part of how people get free, like hearing from other artists how you found your way, like even just that very specific. I think it's so locked up and categorized. I don't even know if saying you need to hunt for it, you need to go look in the Bible, if we can understand what to look for. Once you say that, about the skirts over the head and stuff like that, you start thinking, oh yeah, okay, yeah. And he paints that picture with words, then why can't I paint that picture? What's wrong with, I think hearing those stories is really a big part of it, is helpful.
Well, and the Spirit speaks individually. It's like saying, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to be in the military and bombing somebody. Somebody else who's a Christian, it's perfectly appropriate for them to do that. So the same applies to me as an artist. What I might choose to do might not be appropriate for somebody else, but that doesn't mean it's not appropriate for me. And we should be able to break through the fear of allowing people to be who they are in Christ and not judging them.
Yeah.
I agree with that. That is so true, because if you had some trauma associated with nudity, it might not be a safe thing for you. I don't know. But I do like what you're saying about it's individual. And I'm kind of aware all of a sudden and worried that saying you have to hunt for it, thinking, oh no, because that's a condemnation for a busy person who doesn't have time to hunt. And
no, I disagree 100%.
Okay,
That's
good.
called
I don't want to put another.
No, it's called accountability and responsibility. And this is where I really do think artists in the church have been so squished down that it's almost like you have to like yell and push and say you're being disobedient if you do not figure that out so you can go make what you're created to make. Like there has to be a sense of urgency about it. I don't think it's for artists who are called to make, who are given creative gifts beyond what normal people, other people have. We were given them for a reason. And it is not, I feel the same way in church when people have the same issue with God for 30 years and have been in church for 10 years without, at some point I say, you need to deal with this issue. It's ridiculous that you will sit with this issue with God for the rest of your life. Go deal with it. This God you think is so horrible is horrible. Don't worship that God. You should not be a Christian. If that's who you think God is, you're nuts. That's abuse. That's self-abuse. And it's the same thing with art. Like, it's not an excuse to say, gosh, I don't know. It is for a while, but there's a maturity thing. I think that we need to come around each other and say, you need to hunt. it is your responsibility to figure that out, or don't, but don't sit here being persecuted by this whole thing. And I'm saying this in a loving way. I'm just, sometimes tough love, I think, is helpful. And I don't think there's anywhere you get tough love. I wish there were people in my life at different points who had said, you need to act. You have the capacity and you have gift, and it is a waste that you don't do it. And I have never had those people. I mean, I didn't have them at that point. You know, it is far more noble and meaningful work to use those gifts in ministry. It's more meaningful to use those gifts to help other people. And I don't for a second regret where I am in my life and what I'm doing. And I think this is exactly where I need to be. But I think I don't think artists hear enough. Not only is it okay for you to make what you're making, you need to make what you're making. So yeah, I don't think you should soften it at all, Karen.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I can bend easy, you know. I really loved what you said. I loved your passion. I appreciate it very much.
I can be a little,
I love it. I love
yeah.
it. I loved it. I'm really grateful that you went like that. Because it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like flowers that never get to open.
Yeah.
Well, and when the Spirit's leading you, you don't have to look for anything. It's looking for you.
Yeah.
Well said. And even the crisis, like, of this lady saying that, was the reason I hunted, because I had to meet her the next week, you know, and I had to know. And she respected what I found out.
Interesting. So that's an
We were
interesting part of the
solid.
story.
Pardon?
That's an interesting part of the story too.
Yeah, they were unusual in the love, and they were really a fine group of people. And we're wrong sometimes. And we have to be aware that there are people who may be talking to us that are wrong. And we have to fight for what we've been given to do, or to make, or to be.
Yeah.
And like Anita said, and respect each other for how we are. Different.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the beauty of God and man.
I kind of wonder if, and of course, people have different intentions, or artists have different intentions, but I wonder if, and I think Mako does talk about it, just if our creations can be sort of, just showing how expansive God's grace can be. I mean, I think we tend to have historically like a very narrow, I don't know, I feel like, that I think the definition of grace that we've been given is, I don't think I think we just don't really understand how big it is. And, in terms of like what we've been talking about, like how how something, God might prompt you to do something that another person might not feel comfortable with, and sort of vice versa, like sort of like the military example, for instance. Like, and because I think it's funny because and I guess maybe that's a maturity thing as well. I just remember, like, I kind of, growing up, I still am kind of a very good girl in the sense, okay, these are the rules, like, these are some rules, and I went to theater school, and it was crazy.
Yeah.
Like, and I was just like, and I was very uncomfortable through most all of it. and so, but I think one thing I did get out of it is just sort of like more flexibility on my part of, I guess, what grace is. It's like, it's not necessarily like, okay, well, if you don't do this, you're that. I don't know. It's just, I think there's, and again, going back to fear, I think there's just such a fear, like, oh, well, we're, if we talk too much about grace, or if we give this broader understanding of grace, like, we're gonna lead people the wrong way, and it's like, and then you get into this whole, like, theological, people get into this theological discussion about, like, is there one way, or are there many ways, you just go down this whole, like, and yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I so relate to that experience, Joanna, in theater school, and even anytime have done a show, I feel, especially after I became a pastor, then it became even more pronounced. Like, do I tell people? Because as soon as somebody in that environment knows that you're a Christian, let alone a pastor, it's a whole different relationship. It's just these two worlds just traditionally do not mix. But that's, I think, part of my question around all of this is the ethics. What are the ethics of art making or being an artist? And how do you answer those questions? And how do you be faithful? Is it that every time you walk into a room, you are telling people, are giving them a tract and telling them, walking them through, I feel like there has to be a lot more space for grace and the Holy Spirit to be at work in any given situation than this pressure that it has to be all on. Maybe that actually, this is, as you guys are talking and I'm talking through, it's helping me to understand this black and white thinking is hard for me to understand and grasp, because that's not how I think as a creative person. It's much more nebulous or fluid, I guess. And it's a lot easier for me to see and believe that God is at work in mysterious ways. So I don't know. It's just interesting. It's helpful to talk to other artists, to hear other Christians who are artists, to hear, I don't know, how you think about it. Because it is different. This is different than a conversation with pastors. It's very different than a conversation.
I'm going to confess something I'm embarrassed about, which the George MacDonald book, the Fantasies, as I was reading it, I don't know how I managed to read the whole thing, because it is dated. But there were points in it that I felt a judgment, like, well, wait a minute. Like, he has the guy die and get reincarnated in fairyland. I'm like, reincarnation? Wait a minute. And then I read what C.S. Lewis says about him, that he's like the most, holy man who ever, I don't remember his exact words at all, but his absolute respect for him as a Christian writer made me ashamed of how small I was. Now, that's not my field. I'm really open with the visual arts. So those little knee-jerk things were in me. And they're not safe places, And that's what I meant when I said how free I felt about the entire book. because I've been starting to do, like I did a mermaid, and I like, and it confirmed for me that it's okay to do these things. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm embarrassed to admit that so we can write about reincarnation in a storyline about a fantasy place.
Hmm.
That's permission.
Yeah.
It's vast. He made everything. He's wild.
Well, speaking of the Inklings, Karen, have you read Charles Williams?
No, I haven't.
His stuff is very dark and very complex and very theatrical, Lisa.
Huh.
But he takes it, I think the arts, particularly this day and age, can take us to places witnessing to people who you can't reach any other way.
Yeah.
And it's particularly at this moment, I think, in history with the church, the arts are a huge doorway to reach an audience that we're rapidly losing. And if we don't embrace it, if we aren't forceful, like Lisa was saying, we're in trouble actually as a church.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
my opinion, we're marginalized. You see, if we're not contributing to the culture, we're in the Christian ghetto, and we're non-people.
Mm.
I have a ridiculous, well, it may not be true, but I say, people talk about, there was a sports guy named Robinson, and they say he's the reason Black people were accepted by, white people.
Right.
He broke through. Well, he did, I guess. But you know who really broke through? Billie Holiday.
Mm.
People who emoted, people who
Right.
made beauty. And you can't make them non-people. You can't make someone like that a non-person when
Right.
you've seen their art. And if our art is not being asserted, we can become non-people.
Mhm. Well, that's part of what I've thought about related to the ethics of art making. So, like in particular, as a performer, or even as a writer, for like a filmmaker, is it more offensive to have nudity and bad language, or to have a really bad film? Which is more ethically wrong? Not gratuitous, nudity and language, but that is the only conversation when I talk to actors who are Christians. That's the only conversation they're worried about. Should I do this because I'm going to have to do this or that? Those are important questions, but I think it's more damaging to have really bad art.
I will agree with you. I do agree with you.
But that conversation is never going to, that's, I think, why Mako is so, is maybe resonating, is because he's one of the only people, like, I think this conversation has to come from artists. I don't think, nobody's going to come along with the keys to let us out of jail. We have to free ourselves.
Well, Jesus, God, I'm sorry, but I think, who was it? Somebody in here said, the Holy Spirit, I think it was Anita. He will kind of guide us, but we really have to be aware of the people who want to shut it down. And the culture is our culture is so repressive.
Yeah. Hey, Afton. Well, it's 2:00. Does anybody have any last words or thoughts before we say goodbye?
One quick thought. That's okay.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the book, Mako talks about Neil Armstrong going to the moon, and he said what was really interesting about Neil Armstrong's sort of observations to the moon back, to Houston, wasn't that he was talking about sort of explaining his experience in scientific terms, but he was actually using other sort of descriptive, emotional, and poetic language. Like we have a stark landscape, and like there's a beauty to it, or something like that. And so I guess it's kind of like I don't know. I guess just kind of reiterating just how profound, I guess, that human experience, that beauty can be, that people focus on so many other things, but when you get down to it, that's just how you live life and communicate with others sometimes. So.
Right. Mhm. Anybody else?
Can I say a prayer?
Yeah.
And anybody jump on it. But Lord, show us where our freedoms are so that we can blossom all the way. And show us where the lies are. And till the ground where the lies are, so you can plant the seeds that are supposed to be growing in our lives, wherever they are. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Well, bye, guys. Thanks for joining. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you. This was really great. I really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Joanna. Thanks for the idea.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll have to do it all again sometime.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Joanna. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
All right, bye.